As-Built aims to transform technology-driven smart cities to human-centric smart society with comprehensive and interlinked solutions to improve people's quality of life. Smart Society utilizes As-Built's digital twin IBMS platform to create smart building automation that supports citizens and clients, not just with data integration, but also delivering committed values through the execution of smart projects. Big data collected from IoT devices in each subsystem will be diagnosed and analyzed within As-Built's IBMS platform to create smarter facility management with general preventive maintenance, prescriptive maintenance, and even predictive maintenance. The platform uses data to create an identical twin of the physical space into a digital space to simulate and predict possible events in the future, thus providing actionable insights, deterioration diagnosis, operational fault detection, and automated optimal control. Smart building automation improves aspects of facility management by incorporating building information modeling into the IBMS platform. Building users can enjoy improved experiences via smart tenant services from personal devices to requests for building services. Smart Experience for VIPs is one of the dedicated applications that can deliver an extraordinary experience for your VIPs as they enter the building through IBMS interfacing security CCTV, car parking, room booking, and smart air conditioning system. Through human-centered automation innovations, As-Built strives to create a leading-edge smart society.
Solving complex challenges is in our DNA. Go back to our roots and you'll see why. Surbana Jurong Group was formed in 2015 through a merger of the consulting arms of Housing Development Board and Jurong Town Corporation, who played critical roles in Singapore's development. Today, Surbana Jurong is a global multidisciplinary consultancy group in 120 offices across 40 countries. We are architects, engineers, designers, planners and specialists driven by progressive thinking. By designing and delivering quality housing, workspaces, roads, rail, hydropower and critical infrastructure, we are redefining cities. Building cities, shaping lives expresses how every project is an opportunity to fulfill aspirations and enrich lives. Our logo's bold red dot radiates creativity and innovation, emblematic of Singapore, where the group is headquartered. Surbana Jurong has grown from strength to strength through transformative acquisitions. The group offers comprehensive consultancy solutions, anchored on sustainability and enabled by technology, to partner communities around the world in building a smart, sustainable and resilient future.
At Singapore Management University, we believe cities are the nerve centres of civilization, where creative perspectives meet innovative insights, creating smarter solutions for both planet and people. Cities are only as good as the ideas they are built on. Awaken your ideas with City Perspectives.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the opening session of the World City Summit 2021. I'm your host, Lisa. We are here at the Marina Bay Sands hybrid broadcast studio with an esteemed in-person audience. We are also pleased to welcome our online audience who have just joined us from around the world. In a few moments, I will introduce Dr. Cheong Koon Hean, Chairman of the Centre for Liveable Cities, to give her opening remarks. Mr. Desmond Lee, Minister for National Development and Minister in charge of Social Services Integration, will then deliver his keynote address. This will be followed by the panel discussion for our session, Engaging Communities, Building Resilience. Simultaneous interpretation in Mandarin is available for our online audience. Besides participating in our poll, you can also use the Q&A function to submit questions to our speakers. And for our guests here in the studio, you can post your questions using Pigeonhole Live. We are pleased to launch 2 new publications from the Centre for Liveable Cities. The 19th issue of our flagship magazine, Urban Solutions, is themed Adapting to a Disrupted World, in line with our summit this year. It features an interview with Singapore Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat, an opinion piece by Norman Foster, as well as case studies from Cape Town to Tallinn in Estonia. Singapore's COVID-19 response and rethinking the new urban normal, a commentary, reflects from a built environment and infrastructure perspective how the public, private and people sectors need to adapt and work together in responding to the pandemic. For complimentary access to both publications, please use the QR codes on the screen. Let us now put our hands to welcome Dr. Cheong Koon Hean, Chairman of the Centre for Liveable Cities, to deliver her opening remarks. Dr. Cheong, please.
Well, good morning. A very warm welcome to the 7th edition of the World City Summit. And we are extremely glad to have 40 of our guests in this hybrid studio today. But we are also very glad to welcome over 4,000 virtual attendees who have registered from 315 cities from around the world. This is the first time that the World City Summit has adopted a largely virtual format since its inception in 2008, a result of these extraordinary times we're living in. Originally meant to be held in 2020, the summit had to be rescheduled to 2021 due to the COVID-19 global pandemic. When we first conceptualized the theme in early 2019, that of livable and sustainable cities adapting to a disrupted world, we could not have foreseen how extensively this virus would impact the world. COVID-19 has thrown into stark relief the unpredictability of disruptions that cities face and the importance of building resilience to be able to resist, recover, and emerge stronger from such crises. All around the world, we have seen the ways we live, work, and play change drastically, and many cities are now rethinking our status quo. Even how we run the World City Summit has been fundamentally transformed. When World City Summit 2020 was rescheduled, we quickly pivoted to virtual and hybrid events. An example is the CLC webinar series, where we held 15 webinars throughout the year and reached over 10,000 participants from over 50 countries. The virtual platform allowed greater access to preeminent leaders and experts from around the world to reach a wider audience than ever before. So in a sense, this has been a silver lining from the COVID-19 pandemic, that through technology, we are now able to convene a wider and more international audience, allowing a continued exchange of how our cities can weather the present storm and reinvent ourselves for the future. In fact, it is now more important than ever to retain these connections with our fellow cities and to learn from each other's experience, given the common crisis that we face. It underlines the imperative of the World City Summit, which convenes government leaders, industry experts, and academics to discuss today's challenges, share best practices or innovative urban solutions, as well as forge new partnerships. Adapting to crisis and growing from it is a key feature of resilience, something that cities must learn to do as the challenges they face become increasingly complex. In WCS 2021, we will be examining various themes relating to climate, social, technological, and other disruptions, and how we can effectively build stronger cities that are more sustainable and livable. And over the next 3 days, you will be able to hear from and discuss with global thought leaders at our World City Summit sessions remotely. Some of the key highlights are these: a dialogue later today with Deputy Prime Minister Mr. Heng Swee Keat on how Singapore can respond to crises like the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change to become more resilient in the future. We will also hear from government leaders such as the Vice Minister of China, the Governor of West Java, and mayors from Bilbao and Fukuoka, as well as from corporate leaders on how cities can adapt to disruptions in our virtual sessions tomorrow. And apart from these live sessions, there'll be special addresses by leaders like David Malpass, President of the World Bank, Ms. Carrie Lam, Chief Executive of Hong Kong SAR, and mayoral dialogues with the mayors of cities like Antwerp and Melbourne. They will soon be available for on-demand viewing as they share their thoughts on navigating this shared moment of uncertainty. We have also prepared some virtual site visits to share a taste of Singapore with those who are unable to join us here in person. And Ms. Indrani Raja, our Minister at the Prime Minister's Office, Second Minister for National Development, and Second Minister for Finance, personally shares on our conservation efforts at Tiong Bahru, one of Singapore's earliest public housing estates. Our conversations will continue through a series of World City Summit webinars from July to November, which will deep dive into topics like smart cities, climate change, and health. And we look forward to your continued support and active involvement at these events and discussions. I want to wish all participants a very fruitful forum in the months ahead. And the WCS 2021 would not have been possible without our speakers, our moderators, key partners, and sponsors. The summit brings together organizations of all sectors that are at the forefront of urban innovations. And I encourage you to join our partner events and sponsored sessions to hear more on how they are working with cities to adapt to a disrupted world. And with that, I wish everyone a fruitful and enriching World City Summit 2021. And without further ado, please join me to welcome Mr. Desmond Lee, Minister for National Development and Minister in charge of Social Services Integration, on stage to deliver his keynote. Minister, please.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. And for those of you joining us virtually, a warm welcome from Singapore. I'm told that leaders from some 315 cities are attending this opening session of the World City Summit, and I welcome you to join us. Thank you for taking the time to join us as we all grapple with this common challenge faced by COVID-19. Now, the World City Summit is a unique and valuable platform that brings cities together so that we can share our experiences and learn from one another. Today, I would like to briefly share how Singapore has responded to COVID-19 and the lessons that we have learned so far. And through the course of this summit, I look forward to learning from the experiences of other cities too. I think this is a good platform for us to share ideas and learn from each other. Now, the pandemic has not only been a public health crisis, it has also had a far-reaching impact on our economy, as well as the social and mental well-being of our people. In confronting these challenges, the resilience of Singaporeans has been critical, and strong community support in partnership with the government has played an important role in weathering the storm. Now, let me begin with how we're trying to tackle the public health challenges. When COVID-19 first hit Singapore, we were fortunate in that we could learn from our prior experience battling SARS back in 2003. We adopted similar strategies as we did then: test and detect cases early, isolate them, and control the spread of the virus. And we set up a multi-ministry task force to work across multiple public agencies to mount a coordinated response. But COVID-19 turned out to be different from SARS. It was less fatal, but more infectious. At a certain point, our case numbers started to rise, so we had to take more stringent measures to flatten the curve and prevent our healthcare facilities from being overwhelmed. We temporarily closed our borders, heightened entry, and implemented a circuit breaker, tight restrictions to greatly reduce the number of people interacting with each other, to try to cut off the circulation of the virus. Now, these measures were not easy. They required Singaporeans to change their way of life quite drastically and quite quickly. We had to wear a mask when going out, keep a safe distance from others, and reduce the size of our social gatherings. And it took time for everyone to get used to it. And it required a massive public education effort to explain what the measures were and why they were important. We had to go down to the level of detail and such as marking out where people should sit in public places and how far they should stand apart in queues to maintain safe distance. We also had to carry out enforcement where necessary. Over time, as people understood why these measures were needed for the safety of themselves and their loved ones, they began to follow the restrictions on their own and even reminded each other to observe them. Even as we exited from the circuit breaker, we had to do so quite carefully. We went sector by sector: F&B, outlets, religious activities, arts and entertainment venues, sports, fitness, and so on. And we worked closely with the relevant stakeholders to devise detailed guidelines for resuming activities safely. With the great effort by our healthcare workers and the close cooperation of the public, we have managed to keep the COVID-19 situation largely under control and our fatality rate fairly low. At the same time, the pandemic has had a significant impact on our economy. Our construction sector, for example, had been especially hard hit. As the virus spread across our construction workforce, we had to take many measures to stem the spread. We had to stop construction work for some time, test all our workers, and quarantine those infected. And then adopt stringent new safe management measures at work sites so that work could resume. Many companies and workers struggled, and the government did what we could to support the sector financially and in other ways. Above all, close collaboration with our industry partners was vital. We had daily meetings even to solve problems quickly together. We also had strong support from community groups such as the Migrant Worker Centre and the COVID-19 Migrant Support Coalition. They helped us to take care of our migrant workers through this difficult time. Because it was an emergency, the entire process was messy and there were frustrations on all sides, even as we sought to coordinate and integrate our efforts. But together, we were able to get the sector back on track, though some challenges remain. And beyond construction, other sectors have also suffered greatly, some like aviation and tourism, much more than others. And the government has supported wage, rental and other costs, while employers and workers have adapted by learning new ways of working and new skills. Now, some of the shifts in the way we work are likely to stay. Remote or hybrid working arrangements, serving customers and clients through virtual platforms, these are just some of the trends you must get used to, or in fact embrace. So it's not just managing the immediate impact of the pandemic, but also identifying the big trends arising from it, and taking the opportunity to transform our economy and enterprises for a different long-term future. That is why we set up the Emerging Stronger Task Force, and it identified new opportunities that we could pursue in areas like carbon markets and autonomous vehicles. While we dream big, we started small through what we called Alliances for Action, or AFAs, industry-led coalitions supported by the government that created proofs of concept for new ideas in a compressed time frame. So even as we fight the pandemic, we need to look ahead and prepare for our recovery. Now, beyond the economy, COVID-19 has also brought about various social challenges. One of these was social isolation, as face-to-face interactions were greatly reduced. This was especially so for our elderly who lived alone and could not have as many visitors due to restrictions. So we had to make some allowances and exceptions to allow caregiving visits for these seniors. Government agencies and community groups also stepped up our proactive outreach and befriending efforts. Another challenge was working from home, which is not just an economic issue. It has a social impact too, with its own set of stresses. For instance, employees may not have sufficient space and privacy in their homes for work and meetings. When schools and preschools were closed, many parents had to juggle working from home and supervising their children in home-based learning and providing caregiving at the same time. Not to mention that many also had to take care of elderly parents. So while remote working has its benefits, over time, burnout and fatigue are real concerns. It took time and some trial and error to adapt to these changes. So we also had to take care of our people's mental health and well-being. We set up a 24-hour national care hotline to provide psychological first aid to Singaporeans. We also supported the Youth Mental Wellbeing Network, which brought together more than 1,500 passionate individuals to support youth mental well-being. Above all, family support has been crucial in helping many Singaporeans tide through these times. More broadly, the impact of the pandemic has not been even. Social inequality may be worsened by a K-shaped recovery, where certain parts of the economy resume strong growth while others lag behind. Many of our lower income workers in essential job roles do not have the luxury of working from home. Many others have suffered wage cuts or lost their jobs. The government has had to provide significant support, especially for vulnerable households. But more importantly, this has been complemented by a groundswell of community initiatives and efforts. The pandemic has inspired many Singaporeans to step forward and help one another. One example is the Peers Network, or partners engaging and empowering rough sleepers, who walk the streets to reach out to rough sleepers. Many community groups and places of worship also opened their doors to provide safe, sound sleeping places so that rough sleepers could have a temporary safe place to spend the night. Groups like Belanja Amil and Hawker Heroes have stepped up to rally the community to support our hawkers, do good for the lower income, and appreciate frontline workers at the same time. This spirit of mutual support is the kind of social DNA that we want to encourage even after the pandemic. It is the essence of what we call Singapore Together, a whole-of-nation movement to galvanize community efforts across our society to contribute to a shared future. Through the collective efforts of all Singaporeans, we have managed to bring the COVID situation broadly under control and gradually lift some of our restrictions. But new and more infectious variants of the virus have emerged, and we have to stay on guard. We have had to tighten our restrictions again, relook at some of our processes, and remain on heightened alert. It is a continual journey of learning and adapting. Moving forward, we have to be prepared that the virus may become endemic. So we will step up our testing, contact tracing, and vaccination efforts to identify and isolate cases even earlier and protect more of our citizens from the worst effects of the virus. If we can do this well, we can then open up activities even further. But this will take time and a lot of hard work. In other words, we still have quite a journey ahead of us. But what are the lessons that we've learned so far? I wish to suggest 4 key takeaways in line with this session's theme of engaging communities and building resilience. Now, first is the importance of trust throughout society. An effective pandemic response requires citizens to make sacrifices, which they will only accept if they trust that these are for the greater good. Trust is hard to build, but easy to lose. And a crisis can easily divide a society if everyone looks out only for themselves. So to keep our people together, we need to provide regular and transparent communication, make clear decisions based on scientific and factual evidence, and fight the spread of misinformation. In Singapore, we have benefited from a strong tripartite relationship all these years, where workers, businesses, and the government come together often to find solutions that are in everyone's interest. We also need to nurture the same spirit of dialogue and collaboration throughout our society. Second is the importance of both government leadership and active community involvement. Governments are needed to coordinate efforts, but community is the glue that holds people together. They're good at providing last-mile support, to identify needs on the ground, and to respond quickly and nimbly. We have a lot to be thankful for here, as so many partners have stepped up to contribute: volunteer groups, NGOs, companies, religious and secular organizations, and many others. Globally, we have seen similar displays of solidarity as communities worked hand in hand with governments. In Seoul, South Korea, for instance, NGOs have worked closely with local governments and service providers to monitor assisted living facilities, homeless shelters, and vulnerable groups, to identify and plug gaps in care. And in Los Angeles, many members of the public volunteered at vaccination centers, helping to process registrations and facilitate logistics. I look forward to hearing more about Los Angeles initiatives from Deputy Mayor for Budget and Innovation, Ms. Jean Holm, who is on our panel today. Third is the importance of being adaptable in our city planning. While it is important to make efficient use of scarce resources, the pandemic has shown that we also need to buffer white space that can be quickly adapted for emergencies. Even in land-scarce Singapore, we still need land that can be easily converted quickly to other uses. For example, former schools and convention centers were converted into quarantine and community care facilities at extremely short notice. And community facilities like our community clubs, island-wide, were used over the past year to distribute masks, hand sanitizers, contact tracing devices, and are now being used as vaccination centres. In the longer term, we will also need to review our broader approach to land use and city planning. The pandemic has impacted many aspects of the way we live, work and play, and we need to adapt and adjust accordingly. For instance, as we move towards more remote working arrangements, how much office space we need, and how our workplaces and homes should be designed. These are issues we will need to relook, among many others. In Singapore, we will kickstart public engagement for our long-term planning review in July. We review our plans for Singapore's long-term development every 10 years. And as part of this effort, we will gather Singaporeans' ideas and aspirations for our future city. Fourth is the importance of keeping cities livable and connected. A livable environment has been critical for us as the pandemic has kept people within the city but away from crowded urban and indoor areas. Parks and green spaces have thus become important places for many Singaporeans to seek respite and recreation. Connectivity across the city has also been vital. Not just the usual physical or transport connectivity, but also digital connectivity, as in-person interaction has dipped. A solid digital infrastructure has allowed us to continue working and learning, including with overseas partners, with the World City Summit being just one example. And in line with these takeaways, the Centre for Liveable Cities is launching a commentary titled Singapore's COVID-19 Response and Rethinking the New Urban Normal. This commentary reflects on how the public sector, private sector, and communities need to adapt and work together in responding to the pandemic. It sets out some ideas on how cities may need to evolve so that they continue to be livable, sustainable, and resilient to future shocks and stresses. The publication will be available online after this session. Let me conclude. The fight against COVID-19 is not yet over. It is a fight that Singapore and almost every other city is engaged in. We must work together to find the best solutions for our cities and for our communities. Social resilience and strong partnerships with the community are critical ingredients in this effort. And even as we deal with the pandemic today, we need to keep our eye on the future and plan for how our economies, our societies, and our cities will evolve. In Singapore, we looked at our economic future through the Emerging Stronger Task Force. We are shaping our society's future together with the community through the Singapore Together movement, and we'll plan for our city's future through the long-term plan review, all in close partnership with the community. In tandem, we need to take collective action to lower carbon emissions and combat climate change while preparing our cities for its impact. We launched the Singapore Green Plan 2030 earlier this year to coordinate and give a big push on our climate action efforts. I look forward to sharing ideas, best practices, and opportunities for collaboration through this World City Summit today and over the coming days and months as we keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Desmond Lee. Let us now look at the results of the audience poll conducted earlier. To address the next global disruption, we have asked, what should effective community engagement be based upon? Right, we have a tie between leadership, trust, as well as inclusivity and transparency, and that's closely followed by commitment. Thank you for your participation. We're now pleased to introduce our esteemed panel for Engaging Communities, Building Resilience. Joining us virtually are Ms. Jean Hom, Deputy Mayor of Los Angeles for Budget and Innovation, Professor Lily Kong, President of Singapore Management University, Mr. Edward Walter, Global CEO of the Urban Land Institute based in Washington, D.C., Ms. Amy Chester, Managing Director of Rebuild by Design, New York. And in our studio here, we have Mr. Cheng Xin Yao, Global Managing Director of Guocoland, Mr. David Chan, Professor of Psychology and Director of Behavioural Sciences Institute, Singapore Management University. Professor Chan will be our moderator. Over to you, please, Professor.
Thank you, Lisa, for introducing the panel for me, and a very good morning to Minister Desmond Lee, our excellencies, distinguished guests in the audience, and of course our distinguished guests and participants globally, more than 4,000 of you from different parts of the world. Indeed, to our global audience, may I say welcome again to World Cities Summit in Singapore, and also to this opening panel's discussion on the theme of engaging communities and of course building resilience. I won't introduce the panel because Lisa has done the job for me. What I want to say is some of us know the panelists very well. We have a very diverse panel with different experiences, with also very diverse expertise. And I'm sure, like me, all of you are looking forward to hear the views from all of them. Now, we have 5 panelists, excluding me, and I want to make sure that we get to hear from each of them. And to do that, what I'll do is I'll ask each of you the same question, a general question. Given that COVID has really impacted all areas of our lives, perhaps each of you could just briefly give us an overview of some of the challenges or opportunities, how COVID-19 has impacted your area of work, or will continue to impact in your prediction your area of work, right? Just very briefly, perhaps 3 minutes or so, we go around the table. And maybe I'll start with our Deputy Mayor from Los Angeles, Jean. Over to you, Jean. Okay, I think we have some slight connection problem. That's what happened, that we have to adapt when we have a situation like this. But don't worry, we are resilient. We'll try to come back to Jean when we get a connection with LA. Maybe then over to Lily, President of Singapore Management University. Just a few minutes on what you think COVID-19, how it has impacted your area of work. Lily?
Thank you, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. So a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And as David says, I am president of the Singapore Management University. And in universities around the world, as I'm sure you've read, if not experienced yourself, we've confronted situations where we've had to pivot teaching and learning online in within a very short time period. We have found that at SMU, our faculty have been able to pivot very well. Indeed, very interestingly, our teaching feedback from students has actually gone up. It's improved. But that's not to trivialize the efforts that have had to be put in. Of course, faculty have had to make changes to the way in which they deliver their lessons. But I have to say that students too have had to adapt. And as we heard from the minister earlier, it's not been evenly possible. So for some students, the very real issues of having adequate internet access, not being able to do the part-time work that they ordinarily do that goes towards supporting their families, not necessarily even having the right equipment to do online learning. These are all challenges that have come to the fore, which does suggest, as the minister said, that the inequalities in society have been foregrounded because of COVID. And I think it behooves us as educational institutions to try to support and address that. And indeed, we've tried to do that. Faculty and staff, donors and so forth have come together in very quick time to contribute to a resilience fund, as we called it, to support students in need. At the same time, I have to say very quickly that a university is not just about education, important as that is and central as that is. It is very much also about research, and our faculty have risen to the occasion in contributing perspectives, insights, ideas, thought leadership in various sorts of ways to try to lend light to how, as a city, as a country, we can address the COVID-19 situation. So, for example, some of my colleagues who work on things like supply chain, logistics, supply chain management and logistics, they have, sprung into action to lend insights into how the disruption of supply chains might be mitigated, how they might be addressed, so that we are able as a city-state to be able to continue to survive, if not thrive. At the same time, just reverting back to students, and this will be my final comment, actually many of our students also contributed to the ways in which the country was trying to address COVID. And during the Q&A session later, perhaps there'll be opportunity for me to share more. Thank you, David. Back to you.
Thank you, Lily. I'm also from the Singapore Management University, and Lily is my university president, of course. Most of you know that SMU is a city campus, and I think it gives us a good opportunity to learn how to harness the potential of the communities and, of course, the city infrastructure. Speaking about infrastructure, I have with me here, of course, Sing Yao, the CEO, Group Managing Director of Goodco Land. And Sing Yao, maybe you can share with us about the built environment.
Sure. Thank you very much. What happened with the pandemic was that it created very sudden and huge swings in terms of demand, as well as drop in demands. So for example, the demand for hospital beds, there's big impacts to airports and seaports facilities. So we noticed that really the cities and societies that have performed better were the ones that could very quickly adapt to these changes and challenges, with initiatives that were implemented across the 3P sectors. Government will come up with new initiatives, such as support measures that has to be relevant to the business as well as communities that are disadvantaged. But the private sector also have to adapt to the new realities by pivoting or transforming their businesses so that they could retain, if not create, jobs. With all the frequent changes in policies and safe distancing measures and so on, the communities also have to adjust their lifestyles very regularly in order to make the whole system work. So the point to make here is that when we see this strong coordination, collaboration, we ask ourselves what really is the foundation. I think the Minister has spoken about it as well. The real foundation behind strong 3P collaboration and coordination is really trust. Trust is something that you have to build up through the years and a long period of time, whereby partners communicate, work with each other to really build that confidence and trust. But trust, as Mr. also said, is very fragile. In a crisis, people are put to a lot of tests and stresses. But when the crisis is prolonged, such as now, just to sidetrack, we used to think this thing will go away in 6 to 8 months, and then we thought it would be 12 months, 18 months, and now we still haven't seen really when it will end. So when this thing really prolonged, I think the foundations of trust is really very, very challenged. So we have to really be very careful that when tensions are running high and the different parts of the society is put to real tests, that we always strive to maintain this foundation. What has been mentioned is that open and genuine and regular communication and dialogue across the 3P partners are very important and has to be upfront. But perhaps one thing to think about is really to not see things in zero-sum game. So often we think about, oh, I can only gain when the other side loses. But actually in crisis, we always should try to look at where the opportunities lie, where we could work together, and it always doesn't mean that your loss is my gain, but try to find ways that we can win together. So perhaps I'll end my comment here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sin Yao. I think that resonates with many of us. Not everything needs to be a win-lose or zero-sum trade-off. Of course, there are difficult trade-offs, I think, in reality. Livelihoods is a good example in COVID that we have to deal with. At the same time, the challenge is how do we bring the two together? Right? Even though they may be apparently opposing goals, but perhaps sometimes they can be complementary. And certainly trust probably is one of the foundations. But I guess trust being a social thing is also very much inextricably linked to the urban environment, how you plan your activities. And I don't think the physical and the social can be separated. So that might be a good lead-in to Edward Water, Global CEO from Urban Land Institute, to hear what Edward has to say about how COVID has impacted your side of the world.
Well, David, that is a good lead-in, and thank you for allowing me to participate in the conference today. You know, ULI spends a lot of time trying to connect communities and figure out ways to share best practices. And I think this was a great opportunity, given that COVID presented such a unique challenge to much of the world. So it's a great opportunity for us and others to look at what was working in different places around the world and figure out what cities were doing to improve the lives of their residents and provide new options provide options for their businesses. Because if our businesses don't continue to operate, our cities ultimately are not resilient. We did a report called The Pandemic in the Public Realm that looked across the world to find different examples of how people were trying to cope. And I sort of looking through the report, I saw three themes that I think are worth highlighting that seem to be applied across the world. One, and we heard some examples of this already today, was to really focus on encouraging outdoor activities. It was clear that that was safer. It allowed people, there was an emphasis on staying local, avoiding transit, but also on keeping businesses open. So for instance, in Buenos Aires in Argentina, they made 100 streets purely for pedestrians, adding space for walking and outdoor dining. And I think a lot of that's going to turn out to be permanent. In Melbourne, they created a team to provide design assistance to allow restaurants to convert to outdoor dining. And they created a design guidelines and application process that could be expedited. Because I think that was one of the keys that cities identified. You need to move fast. In other cities, they opened up streets and created better bike networks. One that was a way to recreate when so many other options were foreclosed. And secondly, it became a transportation alternative for a lot of people. So in Bogota, Colombia, they created an emergency bike network that added 84 kilometers of new bike lanes that tracked the same route that buses took. In New York City, Amy, I almost hesitate to say this because you're probably closer to this than I am, but what we learned in New York City was that 100 miles of streets were targeted for biking. About 67 miles of that were open for both pedestrian and cycles. And there's an expectation that some of those changes will be permanent. So maybe you can comment later on whether or not that's actually working in New York. I know it's certainly happening a lot in Washington, D.C. The last key was one that also was described before, where I understand Singapore has also been focusing on how to expand on this theme, which is being innovative in how we use our park, and also the opportunities to create more parks. So in Poland, they actually replanned their park to allow created squares, and allowed the squares were used to create social distancing, and they allowed the grass to grow up so that they could actually, in effect, enforce the social distancing that our medical professionals told us was necessary. In Atlanta, they actually closed a golf course one day a week and made that available to the residents for outside recreation, creating a wonderful alternative for residents that might not have had one. And closer to home, just outside of Washington, D.C., in one of our local counties, in an effort to try to keep their businesses operating during a really tough time, they created an ordering platform and created designated pickup areas tied to their parks where food could be delivered. So, all creative ideas, a lot of things that had never been done before, but are really good examples of how cities were being thoughtful and caring about their communities.
Thank you, Edward. What struck me was closing the golf course a day a week seems like a pretty good idea to me. If you get enough in a landscape Singapore, maybe minister can consider that, having the golf course open space for a variety of activities, right? Don't quote me on that one. Maybe with that, I'll go to Amy. Amy, of course, Managing Director from Rebuild by Design, and share with us about COVID-19 impact.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Singapore has always been just an incredible partner to us. So Rebuild by Design brings together global experts to work directly with communities and local governments on the ground to plan for climate change. And just like a natural disaster, COVID-19 showed us that the most vulnerable are the most affected, and that the most important is to be designing with the most vulnerable of how we're going to build back together. So while everyone else went online, we went online too. And it's very hard, I will say, to do meaningful engagement online. So we had to be very creative in the ways that we do it. But now that our societies are beginning to turn the tide and beginning to think about the future, what we're really focused on is the COVID recovery funds and making sure that every dollar that is building back communities are doing it in a way that is climate forward, that is doing it to help the most vulnerable first, and that is doing it in a way that will have multiple benefits for that $1. So every dollar goes a lot further. So we're trying to work with our governments, both on the national and the local level, to ensure that there are, that we reform cost benefit analysis, to make sure that the projects that we want to see that we know will help both on the physical side to help against climate change and also on the social side are going to be the ones that bubble up. So we can make sure that every investment that we make after COVID are ones that are going to help our communities for the future.
Thank you, Amy. Before I open up for questions, I have a screen in front of me where I have online questions streaming in. I'll try to look at the questions, but we still have time, and I may want to take the prerogative of a moderator to try to ask our panelists to clarify maybe and elaborate some of the points that you have raised. There are 4 of you here. I am trying to keep what you say in my working memory, which is okay because our working memory can take in 7 ± 2 chunks at any one time. But first to Lily. Lily, you mentioned the role of universities, and I thought that is pretty important, of course, in how faculty and students have adapted. At the same time, very much cognizant of our theme today, how do you think our universities can play a more active role, or how can our universities, be it in Singapore or elsewhere, engage our communities better in terms of building resilience?
So thank you, David, for cycling back to this. So first, I would begin by sort of asking ourselves what we mean by resilience. As a good academic, I begin with definitions. And, you know, I do think that resilience is very much, you know, forgive me for stating the obvious, it's about positive adaptation in the face of adversity. And adversity can come in different forms. Of existential interest would be, you know, climate change. So think global warming, melting of ice caps, floods, droughts, impact on food production, and so forth. But it's also, of course, very topically, adversity posed by pandemics. So nearly 4 million have died, nearly 180 million have been infected by COVID-19 and so forth. But very often, adversity is also about personal lives, how we face adversity in our personal lives, the loss of loved ones, the loss of livelihoods, the loss of personal health, or even food poverty. Where is the next meal going to come from? And these are just the sorts of resiliences that we need to help build for communities to face adversities. So how then do we go about building resilience? And, you know, some of you have talked about the importance of trust, for example, and so forth. But for me, what role can a university play in that? And I just want to be a little bit self-critical. And by self, I don't mean myself or my own university only, but the university sector more broadly, which has, I think, over time, sometimes lost the way, if I might put it that way. a sense of, chasing after rankings, things like citation counts and H indices and so forth. But really, at the end of the day, what is a university to stand for, supported by its community? It really, I think, should be contributing back to community and society through the graduates that it nurtures, and through those graduates being able to make a difference to community and society, in this case, helping communities build resilience, but of course in many other ways as well. It is in the research that is done at universities that can make a difference to strengthening community, societies, and economies. So whether it's in contributing to individual resilience or to societal resilience or environmental resilience or economic resilience, I think universities have a responsibility to play a role. And there are different ways in which, we can do that. Through the programs that we do, the educational programs that we run out, I'm very proud of our program at SMU, where our students are expected as a graduation requirement to volunteer to deliver community service before they can graduate. And why I'm really proud is not because we have the program. We have a program requirement of 80 hours before they graduate. But why I'm really proud is because our students do 140 hours on average. And during COVID, many of the students stood up to help the different communities build that resilience. So at a time when the migrant worker dormitories were particularly infected, our students were standing up and developing and devising programs that could fit into larger efforts within society to support the migrant workers and to strengthen their mental health and their, their mental resilience when they were isolated. So our students were coming up and with programs where they would call the migrant workers and have conversations with them. They were involved in distributing sanitizers and masks to the larger community and so forth. So, the educational programs that we develop are not just classroom programs. They very much deserve to be community-facing programs as well. And those are just some examples. I could go on, but I should probably stop and give everybody else a chance to speak as well. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Lily. I think it's a good reminder for all of my colleagues in universities, not just in Singapore, but elsewhere, and our students as well, that the mission of universities is really to create knowledge, to disseminate it, and to apply it. And I think, therefore, I would agree with Lily, of course, that engaging with the communities actually falls within our mission. Something for us to think about, reflect, and perhaps live the life of it, and in addition to preaching about it. And then in that way, we can get our people to really trust, I think, our university's competence, your integrity, as well as do you mean what you say? Do you say what you mean in terms of your benevolence, how you approach things? You get where I'm going with this, speaking about trust. When Sin Yang, you talk about trust, you mentioned the 3 Ps, and I take that to be the public sector, the private sector, and the people sector. Sin Yang has worked in the public sector. You are now, of course, in the private sector, doing very well. And you, of course, do a lot of volunteer work as well, and so you are familiar with the people sector. My question for you is that when you talk about the trust building process, I think it's difficult enough to build a trust with our spouse, with our friends, maybe with our leaders. How do you then talk about trust in building across these 3 sectors? To me, it is really a big challenge. So in your experience, what is one of the biggest challenge that comes to you when you talk about building trust, not just within, but across the 3 sectors?
We heard that the tripartite relationships in Singapore is quite strong. So that's been something that we built over the years. But one of the challenges, I feel, that one of the greatest challenges really is the way we are receiving information and news and the way we are sharing. I think now we, through social media or all sorts of digital network, we're getting a lot of information through our close contacts to our friends. And a lot of times when people get reports, and these reports may not necessarily be accurate, but many people actually do not verify the accuracy before they start sharing the information. And then when we receive information with someone who we know, who are close to us, or who we trust, we tend to believe that information a bit more. So this makes it difficult to know what is the real truth. And when you have very polarizing views and data and facts and so on, I think that is one of the very key erosion of trust that can be built up over the years. So I've been thinking about what really can we do about it. We really can't stop the realities of the media. Maybe there are some things, but I do not know. But I feel that leaders, by leaders I mean really leaders in all realms, public, people, private sectors, all have a key role to play. Leaders have a voice that is more public and louder, and depending on which platform they're using it, they have an influence. So I feel that leaders have to be very, very careful to firstly ensure that what they say are factually accurate. Also very important is that leaders have to avoid polarizing comments. When again, I mentioned when tensions are running high and then you want to get the other side to do what you want, a lot of times people resort to highly polarizing comments in order to push a point or to force the opponents to bow to your demands. That should really be avoided at all costs. So I think it would be really great if all leaders could adopt an approach towards balance, accuracy, and always try to see things from the other side, and always try to go for win-win or win-win-win. Just quickly, a second point is that I think actions also speak louder than words. So leaders, when called to action, or called to act rather, when they're given the opportunity to make a difference, should embrace and show and lead by example. So that would be my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure by leaders, you mean not just national leaders or city mayors and governors, but leaders, be it in the universities, academia, be it in the public or private sector, or just a CEO or a supervisor with people that you have to work with, right? I think even in an SME, a small medium enterprise, as a small supervisor, so to speak, with a small span of control, with just a few people reporting to you, I think those are times where the leadership true colors get revealed, in testing times like this.
If I may just quickly add, leaders also include the civil societies, interest groups, associations, and so on. So really, there are also leaders in the people sector as well.
Yeah, that's thanks for reminding us not to forget the people sector. After all, being people-centric is the most important. And as we do our advocacy in different roles and responsibilities, how do we do that constructively? I think that is quite a challenge for at least some cities that I'm familiar with. Maybe over to Edward. Edward, you mentioned, and I recall this, that different cities examples, I'm still trying to get the golf course out of my mind, but in addition to that, there are quite a number of things that you talk about, in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of how that links with communities and so on. And I recall one of the things that you alluded to is how leaders, how planners need to be proactive in terms of getting things done, coming up with initiative, especially in these dynamic times. The question I have for you is that, at least from my own research, and I'm sure research from many others, and even in our day-to-day lives, we know that being proactive can either help or hinder a lot of relevant outcomes. If we say the wrong thing at the wrong time and we say it very fast and very quickly and take a lot of initiative about it, I think sometimes it can backfire. So my question to you, of course, is that being proactive can help, it can also hinder. How then how would you advise our leaders or even the communities to be proactive in a way that can really be effective, be proactive in a way that is timely?
I think that's a great question. And as we looked at how communities had managed through the pandemic, one of the themes that we noticed were communities that had already been proactive about their general resilience strategies, not necessarily one targeted at a pandemic, but had been thoughtful about how to deal with all the other challenges that cities have. They had gone through a process to be thoughtful about how they might confront that challenge. And I think that created a framework that then allowed them to deal with the specific challenge that was presented by COVID. When you look more specifically about how they address that, I think there were sort of three major themes that we identified. The first one really kind of goes around the theme of move quickly, experiment. Temporary is okay. The pandemic is not going to be forever. You're not necessarily crafting forever solutions right now. What you need to do is figure out solutions that allow your community to continue to operate. So in Rotterdam, they just simply let restaurants turn parking spaces into decks where they could serve outside. There was no permit process because they knew it wasn't going to last forever. So they put that in place. I think a second key theme is one that we just heard in the discussion around trust. Listen to the community. City officials have to play a leadership role, and they're the ones that can waive regulations that allow things to happen. But individuals can give you feedback. All of your different associations and interest groups within the city all have a role to play in this. You know, in the case of Dublin, they actually created an online portfolio that allowed citizens to just simply let them know where there were challenges around mobility. And it was a great way for the city to understand where they had transportation issues. And I think the last thing I'd highlight is another theme that we've heard already this morning, which is to focus on equity. The impact of this pandemic was incredibly harsh on disadvantaged populations. They probably have more people living together, and their employment was probably more disrupted by the inability to actually work remotely. And so I think it's in our cities and our governments are in the best place to try to rectify that inequity. I think the cities that do the best job of those three things are the ones that you will see will do the best in the long run.
Thanks, Edward, for bringing up the issue of inequity or inequality. I think the COVID has really shown us how different people from different groups, not just socioeconomic class, but you could be a caregiver, for example, or you could be a sandwich generation with elderly parents to take care of and also young children to take care of. So when we implemented a home-based learning, where in other words, the children, you don't go to school, you stay at home and continue to interact with the teachers, I think that very change that you make in the larger system has a lot of impact, because now parents have to supervise younger students at the same time, younger children, and at the same time you have to take care of elderly parents. So caregiver exists regardless of socioeconomic class, and I think Singapore tries very hard to identify all these target groups, invest resources accordingly. I think we are still learning, and I suppose other cities are doing the same as well. Again, we come back to the issue of trust and working together. And both of you, I think Edward and Sinyao, talked about taking perspective, the humility to be able to question yourself and try to see things from the other points of view. That reminds me of one of the hardest things to do is between communities themselves who are on the ground and with leaders, right? Be it in government, national leaders, or leaders of a city, where you have to make very difficult decisions with a lot of information and so on. But what matters to the people on the ground in the community is the here and now and so on. So I'd like to go to Amy Chester. In your Rebuild by Design, I understand that you work a lot with trying to bring global experts together, trying to advise, and also really to bring communities and governments together. Could you share with us, maybe from your experience, how do you actually get the communities and the local governments to work together when they have quite different perspectives and, frankly speaking, perhaps quite different priorities?
Well, it's not always easy. And first, we have to get them to trust us, actually, and to trust that we'll take their hand and we'll walk them through it. It's interesting how trust has become this huge theme in this conversation. And it was something that I actually really wanted to talk about, because I think the largest leaps we can make communities is actually where politicians and elected officials begin to trust them, and to begin to trust the fact that they don't need to have all the answers in order to go to a community. And I think that is one of the things that we find time and time again, and it's the biggest hurdle to get over with governments. The biggest hurdle to get over on the community side is just to give them another chance. Because usually in every community we've worked with, no matter where you are in North America or not, communities have long memories, and they might be angry about something that a different politician did, a different layer of government did. They don't really understand the different, aspects of what's responsible for the city or the state or the federal government. And they're just carry along this anger and this tenseness about it. So getting the communities to take down their guard a little bit and getting the governments to understand that they don't need to have all the answers and they can go into a community with a little bit of humility is the thing that we try to do early and we try to do best. It's very interesting when politicians go out, they make promises when they're campaigning. It's actually election season in New York. We're going to have a new mayor this year, and we have a big primary coming up in 2 days. And when you go out your campaign, you're going and you're saying, I have all the answers. But when you're governing, you don't want to raise their expectations and say you have all the answers. So you end up as a politician in this kind of like strange place where you don't want to go and say, I can promise you this. However, what we try to show politicians and what we try to say to the community is that it's okay to not have all the answers as long as you're being transparent, as long as you're bringing the community in and saying to them, look, here's what could happen. We may lose this budget line. We may have a pandemic. We may have something that changes everything here, but you have my word that I'm going to come back to you first and explain it to you, and we can make the decision together. And you see this huge transformation when there are elected officials who have that honest conversation with communities. All of a sudden, communities, their ears perk up and they start putting their guard down a little bit, and that's when the real work begins.
Thank you, Amy. I thought not having all the answers and confessing about it is really quite important, isn't it? Although I think there might be some differences across cities or countries in the predisposition of our leaders to be able to say that, because I think in some populations or some city dwellers, somehow or another, either because of your cultural DNA, your historical context, you do look up to your leaders for answers. And when you don't have an answer, just like when you enter a doctor's clinic, when the doctor says, it's okay, let's co-create your diagnosis together, that's not going to work. You want to look at the doctor and say, give me the answer, give me the prescription. Now, I'm not advocating a medical model, and I don't think it works, except to say that perhaps the predisposition towards not having the answers is going to be quite different across cities. And in fact, that makes it even more important, right? I think because the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that really you don't have all the answers. So what Singapore, for example, tries very hard to do now is to have an alliance for action to get people from all walks of life together and really try to genuinely, not just lip service, but genuinely create, to represent the problem accurately and then perhaps create a solution together. And I think that is common across cities, common across cultures, and I'm sure we'll come back to that. The idea of not having all the answers being a starting point, I think is quite an important one. I might also want to remind all of us who are experts in our own fields that, research has shown that the more expert you are, the more confirmatory biases you have, and the more likely you think you have all the answers. So bear in mind that it is quite important for us to also realize that the world is not compartmentalized into the way we organize our knowledge or in our roles and responsibilities, and that's a motherhood statement, but practicing it, I think, is quite another thing. It's really quite difficult, but important and nevertheless. Now with that, thank you very much, but I'm not ended yet. We have some questions coming in online, both from my distinguished guests of 40 in the room, as well as more than 4,000 globally watching in now. I first apologize that it's not possible to go through all your questions. I have a screen here. The font size are big enough for my eyesight. Let me try to read a question that come online. And audience, you could just also take a look at the back of the screen if you like. A question from Mr. Saleh. Mr. Saleh is a mayor in Kenya. The question, I'll try to read out for our panelists. The question says that in multi-ethnic and deeply divided communities, how can we best engage communities to build trust, right? In communities where it's multi-ethnic and deeply divided. I may want to add, I see there's a point there about also in multi-ethnic communities that are harmonious, right? I think it is quite important because multi-ethnic could mean very divided, but it could mean, like in the case of Singapore, where there's quite a relative high standard of social harmony, but nevertheless not to take it for granted. I would have liked to go to LA to listen to our deputy mayor. I think there's some connection problem, but I also want to hear from other speakers. I wonder if Lily, could you comment on this question in terms of multi-ethnic, be it divided or united?
Very happy to do that. I've had the privilege of working on multicultural issues over many years. My focus has been very much on interreligious relations. I would say that, from the work that I've done, building community and building trust around, ethnicity or religion need not mean we are focusing squarely on those issues. So if you're trying to cultivate inter-ethnic understanding or inter-religious understanding, sure, the most obvious thing to do is to say, let's develop a greater understanding about your religion, my ethnicity, my culture, and so forth. But what I found really works that brings people together is not actually in that sort of space, but in the space that is actually secular. Getting people to work together on issues that may have nothing to do with ethnicity or religion, or at least not coming at it from an ethnic angle or a religious angle. So what do I mean by that? If you take, for example, a particular need in the society, let's just say food insecurity and food poverty. If you get people from different ethnic groups, different religious groups working together for a common cause, studies have shown that it builds that relationship, it builds that trust, it builds that sense of common purpose that transcends ethnicity and religion a whole lot better than if you were bringing them together to say, let's talk about our differences in ethnicity or religion or culture or whatever it is. It is in the secular common space where common activities are going on that you can actually build the relationships so much better. So whether it's the playground, the sports field, the social sector, those are platforms where I think studies have shown you're able to build the relationships that will be much more long-lasting. Thank you.
Thank you. Those of you might be aware that Lily has done excellent work in Singapore on the hawker centers. Hawker centers in a local context is like food centers. They are very clean, very inexpensive, affordable food, and a variety of food from different cultures. And people of all segments come together, I think, in these hawker centers. And I think what Lily's research has shown us that common space is so important. Because of time, I'm just going to take a last question. I have a question here from Miss Maria. I think, Miss Maria, you are from Tourism Board in Philippines. And the question appears to be directed to Amy and also to Edward, if I could, and I'll try to end with that because of time. It says, what are some examples of programs that you are aware of that can develop leadership capacities or capabilities in cities and communities to facilitate community building and engagement? I suppose formal or informal programs. So very briefly, if I may go to Amy first and then to Edward, what are some programs that you're aware of?
It's an interesting question that I haven't thought much about. Though I really think that the most people who do this work and work directly with communities do it out of love, and they grow up doing it. So they get a job like in their 20s and they keep on doing it, and they start building that leadership, and they start becoming a community member, and then they start becoming really smart about what their community needs and being a spokesperson for their community, working with elected officials, with other nonprofits, and you start building that leadership. And then they start building leadership in the community themselves. Whether you're a tenant leader, whether you're a block captain, there are many different ways to build leadership. And it's the community organizations, in my experience, that are the ones that are doing it. They may not be getting a grant to do it, or they might not be going to school to do it, but I think that really true leadership comes from people that do it out of a love of their community and a love, of their home and their city, and they want to see it better. And then they have a lot of practice advocating for it. And so in some ways it's unlearned. So I'm sorry that you can't just go to a leadership program, but would love to talk to you if you want to reach out.
Thank you. Edward?
The only thing that I would add to that is that where I have seen leadership work the best, and I'm thinking primarily right now of Washington, D.C. at the city level, not at the national level, is where there's a high degree of transparency between the government sector and the rest of the community. When decisions happen out in the open, when people are really having an honest conversation about the challenges that the city faces, I find that leadership becomes more sensitive to the problem, and oftentimes by having more voices contribute to the discussion, ultimately gets to a better answer when they're trying to find the solution.
Thank you. I think I want to give Xin Yao in the studio the last word. How do you train your leaders of our Agokoland?
I think probably lead by example is very important. In our internal meetings, I think I really like the point Amy made. Even in business, actually, we are dealing with complex, and we often do not know what is the future or what's going to come when we make a business decision. Highly complex, uncertain, and unknown. It's very important to go into a meeting. In our management meeting, I often start by outlining what is the challenge, what's the unknown, and really it is a co-created effort to find the best solution. And I think that is, in a microcosm, the way to build resilience in a company, and probably the same for a bigger society.
Well, thank you, panelists, for this wonderful session. You make my task really easy. There is no need for me to do a roundup or to summarize, because you all have made your comments, I think, very clear, very succinct, very concise. I think suffice to say that resilience and, of course, engagement is clearly multidimensional, as all of you have pointed to us the various dimensions of it. Multi-level, certainly, including not just the individuals, but communities at different levels, organizations, sectors, and so on. And reminding us, all of us here who are leaders in one way or the other, the importance of engaging communities, having public trust. And that brings me back to what Minister Desmond said in his opening remarks, that trust is really pretty hard to build. But I think once lost, it is difficult to restore. So something very fragile, but something very powerful if we have those trusts. So thank you very much, my dear panelists, and I look forward to seeing some of you in person soon. And if you could all join me, put your hands together, the global audience as well, and to thank our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our esteemed panel for this insightful discussion this morning. We regret that the LA Deputy Mayor is unable to join us, and we've now come to the end of this session. Playbacks will be available at our online resource gallery in a few hours. Do catch our next session featuring our special addresses and mayoral dialogues, which will air online shortly at 9:45 a.m. Singapore time. Before you leave, please help us to fill in our feedback form by using the QR code on the screen. Thank you, and until then, goodbye.